You're listening to the Bitcoin Lawyer Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Lawyer Podcast. Bitcoin Lawyer is your legal bridge between Bitcoin and freedom. Today, I'm joined by Laszlo Kiss. Laszlo is a practitioner of citizenship and residency by investment, originally from Hungary, but based in Malta for the last 20 years. Laszlo, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate being here and thanks for the invitation.
Of course. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll go ahead and dive right on into it.
40 years might be a little too much for my age.
Okay, well,
You know, right? I started my own private business in Hungary. I'm Hungarian by birth. I started my own private business in 92, and that was international wealth planning, tax planning, company formations, and so on and so on. Lots of things related. And quite soon, obviously, I have found out that there is a quite big ongoing demand from our part of the world, especially Central and Eastern Europe, for citizenship residency permit in the Western, much more developed world, if I could say so. And that is the reason why I started to find suitable people, suitable possibilities. Also, I had in fact, I had two mentors. They were developing citizenship programs, and that caught my fascination. And I decided that, okay, if somebody comes with this idea, many of them, I just try to get really information, auctionable information, which I can use. And then let's hope that I can help clients to achieve their aims. And our first citizenship sale happened in 1997. At that time, it was in Grenada. That was an old Grenadian program. For the listeners who are not so familiar with the business, Grenada is in the Caribbean islands. There are 5 such countries now which offer citizenship. So all in all, Grenada was at that time one of the leaders. It were my mentors who developed this citizenship program legislation, pricing, procedures and so on. And I managed to get one citizenship. And from that point, I realized that this should be part of our services because it gives you really a very good diversification possibility for clients. And all in all, everybody heard about that, yes, it is possible, but it was like a big magic at that time. So all in all, I started to collect the information, connections, necessary partners in the specific countries. Not too many things happened the next decade, but after the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, many European countries started residency programs, and the European Commission allowed several Caribbean countries and Pacific Ocean countries to have visa-free travel to Europe, in fact, to the Schengen area of Europe. And then the business started to boom and increase exponentially. And then for the last I have to say 12 years or 13 years, I've been working with citizenship and residency solutions 24 hours of my day.
That's quite the history lesson as well as just, your background. Out of curiosity, just to maybe give a little perspective for the listeners, that first Grenada CBI program in 1997, how much were they selling that citizenship for?
It's a very, very good question, by the way. Currently, for a single applicant, including all the government fees, donation, due diligence fees, and so on, local professional fees, it costs around 270,000 US dollars to get a citizenship. At that time in 1997, the net price was 40,000 US dollars.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I don't know.
Inflation
Yeah.
Inflation works all over the world in basically every single industry, service sector, and so on and so on. So this behaves the same way because it operates in a normal capitalistic type of surroundings. Yes, that's the difference now between 40 to 270.
I was gonna say I don't necessarily know how much inflation has jumped up since like the late '90s, but I mean that was almost 30 years ago, so maybe that makes sense. Um, we talked a little bit about how you got into the business. How have you seen the business evolve over, the last couple of decades? That's a question that I always ask the different practitioners in this business that I interview. A lot of them start off in maybe financial services or something in the banking and then move into this because it makes sense. They're interacting with high net worth individuals and they already have a clientele base that sort of thing. So I'm curious, how have you seen the paradigm shift maybe in the business itself or in the clientele during your time doing citizenship and residency by investment?
Not only there are so many parts of this or aspects. Let me start with one, and this is the. I think that the parallel is how the developed countries started to work against the tax havens, and tax havens have been operating since the Second World War, and then the first attack from the OECD, meaning that, let's say, that the big developed countries with huge tax incomes and lots of obligations, so obligations to the society, they started to attack the tax havens in 1999. I think that was the first starting point. And then gradually, although slowly, but gradually, they just changed the perception of the industry and also the rules for licensing, for regulating, for punishments, for information sharing. And I see nearly the same procedure or the same things going on at the same time, starting, let's say, at 2011, when this business really started to pick up. Previously, it was just something which was not interesting for many people. And then because the interest increased, then more and more articles, then it increased the interest, and so on and so on. So it was up until before, let's say, COVID, it was a booming type of a business. But then this negative connotation of buying a passport, which quite often is in the press, started to wake up that, okay, who are the criminals? All of the people who are getting this are criminals. So it is like the same way as for the offshore jurisdiction. Anybody having an offshore structure is a criminal and a tax evader.
Right. Guilty until proven innocent.
Exactly. Second thing which happened in our business in the last 15 years, because I think that I can call it as the last 15 years, is that quite a lot of wealth started to be generated worldwide in the 1990s. And then with that, obviously, the countries where this wealth was generated, and I'm talking mainly about China and then India, but India is in this respect for citizenship and residency is just a second in place. Then the Chinese entrepreneurs who got really onto the affluency level of that they can afford 200,000 or whatever it takes to get a citizenship or a residency solution. And that hugely increased the demand coming in this business. Expressly, then, for example, in Hungary, we had a program where 84% of the applicants from the 6,000 in 3 years were Chinese citizens. So this kind of demand, in addition to the supply side of it, which I mentioned that after the financial crisis, Spain, Portugal, Malta, Cyprus, Switzerland, Hungary started to have their own residency programs. Malta started a citizenship program. Vanuatu started a citizenship program. So all in all, the supply increased, but the demand was definitely there, increasing all the time. And then it seems that yes, the possibilities for this are really as a kind of a parallel are now being a little bit squeezed by the ruling governments or multinational organizations like the European Union, European Commission, which made it one of their most important tasks to kill the multi-citizenship program, which was partly stopped 2 weeks ago. So this kind of regulatory backlash, if I can call it as it is now we could feel, and information exchange between the countries, between the countries themselves which are operating these programs, and between the countries where these citizenships or residencies are used, whether it's the European Union, whether it's the United States, whether it's Canada, whether it's the UK. So now information sharing the same way as with offshore structures is going ahead, which means that yes, it's a much more regulated and much less open type of a business, if I may approach it from my own side.
I definitely would agree with you in the sense that these multinational organizations, you mentioned the EU, the EC, but also organizations, and we'll get into this a little later, but like the OECD, the FATF as well, putting financial and political pressure on all of these sovereign nations to curtail their own money generating programs that they should have the autonomy to continue to operate. But we'll definitely get into that a little later. You did touch on Malta, and I wanted to bring that up. 2 weeks ago, For all the listeners who aren't really involved in this business or don't have the context, Malta had a citizenship by investment program as of a few weeks ago. It was the only operating citizenship by investment program in the Union. The current version of it started in, what was it, 2020?
Or the current version in 2019, I think.
2019, but originally started in 2013. And, it even had the blessing of the EC in 2014. The European Commission took Malta to court back in 2023, and there was a decision by the European Court of Justice 2 weeks ago on April 29th, I believe, basically saying that Malta was not honoring the conditions of the treaties, that it was violating the genuine link clause. I may not be using the exact terminology, but basically that to maintain goodwill and cooperation, I believe was one of the words they used between member states, that their citizenship by investment program violated the treaties, and basically not that it can't continue, but not under its current version. So I was just curious, Laszlo, if you could give us your opinion of the court decision and how you maybe feel that might affect future business or just the landscape of the industry in general.
I would like to start it from slightly farther away. The European Commission is just like a government, and then it's usually the Parliament, which is the European Parliament, which is pushing certain matters, not just the Commission. And that might not be politically correct, but I would say, and I think that many people agrees with this, that European Parliament is mainly socialist minded. And that means that the fact that somebody who is affluent or rich can have something what other poor people can't have is just something which they shouldn't allow. They could allow millions and millions and millions of migrants. And I do not want to get into politics now. I'm just simply stating it. France could give citizenship to 500,000 people from Africa, mainly from Africa, from North Africa, a year. While how does Malta dare to give citizenship for people who are contributing a serious money, which, by the way, during COVID saved big part the economy of Malta, and they were distributing and selling. Let's say they had 300, 400 citizenships per year compared to the thousand. This is just really, I mean, whichever way I see. Okay, I'm professional biased, I admit it, but I'm also want to. Well, you are in a business, you love it, and because of that, this was like a red flag for the European Parliament and the European Commission. And even though the European Advocate General said that the European Commission has no substance behind its claim because it's all vague, because it was all vague, like European values. I mean, we are talking about laws. Which is the actual law section, or section of which law, which somehow this threatens? And then at the end, the European Court of Justice, which I'm not really familiar about the actual person's past background activities, but unfortunately, to decide the matters, that yes, it is information with lots of adverse and very bad information, like information sharing and all this nonsense and European values. And they said that, well, there are no ties, no real ties to that country, and therefore this shouldn't be allowed, because it's a breach over something like a cloudy type of a legislation, which could include many things and hardly anything.
One of the points, and I think I mentioned this when you and I met in Dubai last week, that I interviewed Joseph Muscat, who was former prime minister of Malta, and one of the points he made about the program was that there's no European country that has any objection when a prime minister or a president naturalizes a footballer to play for their national team, or there's never any background check or any due diligence on someone when they get married and bring in a non EU national, and that person under EU family settlement rights gets residency and eventually works towards citizenship. There's no issue with that. So, why is there an issue if a country wants to nationalize someone for making an economic injection of capital to the country? Like, one is benefiting everyone and the other is just someone maybe helping out the national football club, or someone chooses to marry from outside their country. Like, why are we infringing on the sovereignty of member states and sovereign states was basically his argument. I definitely share your sentiment about the judgment, and especially about Malta and using the capital from that program during COVID. I remember reading in one of the things they built a 65 block flat for retirees in London, for people of Maltese descent, or who had retired in London when Malta was part of the UK, and made, these retirement flats available to them. And so they're providing retirement homes, places to live, hospitals, that sort of thing, and really building up the infrastructure of the country with this money that's being injected. But apparently that's not good enough for the ECJ. So uh,
I'm sorry, going back to the information sharing. Think about it. Malta publishes a list of newly naturalized citizens in the official gazette, publicly available. Have you heard of such publication anywhere in the European Union? Not in Hungary.
I'm not aware of maybe if there's like citizen rosters. I'm from the US, and we do have something called the Federal Register, which we actually list people who obtain citizenship, people who renounce citizenship. All of that information, and at least in the US, is publicly available, but I'm not aware of how it works on a member by member situation. I wasn't aware that Malta did publish that information.
Yes. Every year, including those who got the citizenship via this kind of donation by extraordinary investment, and also the ones which were where the citizenship was based on marriage or extraordinary circumstances, refugees or whatever it is. So that is also, if I go through this, this is just anyway. Decision has been done. We could comment on it many things, but at the end, decision is there. So it's time to wake up and change the system a little bit to satisfy these conditions.
I definitely think there will be some retooling of that, but that still remains to be seen how that plays out. I did want to maybe turn conversation from citizenship to residency, because I think that's where a lot of practitioners, yourself, myself, I saw the article that you actually published today on LinkedIn, and you mentioned something that just a few years ago, correct me on the year, but I believe you said 21 out of 27 EU countries had a residency by investment scheme.
Yes, it either officially announced in a published way that yes, if you are clean and you put down the money, then you are guaranteed to receive it. And there are nearly all the countries. If you make a substantial investment, obviously that country would say, "Okay, come, you would become a resident because then we love that you are generating jobs and you are getting money into our economy."
Do you think that either the EC, or possibly, I don't know if they'll bring any country to the ECJ, but do you see maybe the EC having any issues with residency programs after this judgment? Or do you think there will be renewed scrutiny?
Think that in general terms, this judgment doesn't have any connection with residency matters. And the reason is, and quite often, even when people are asking me about citizenship and residency, I have to define slightly or what's the difference between the two. And citizenship is usually one, you become a member of a society, and then it cannot be taken away easily at all, and it's yours, and then you enjoy the same rights and obligations. You share the same rights and obligations as other citizens. So you are just the same. But if you get only a residency, that means that you are permitted to stay and live in that country for a
Mhm.
specified time period. And therefore, it's much easier to be taken away. It's much easier to cancel. It's much easier to change the laws and regulations because then you are just a foreigner. You are not as much part of the society than a citizen, which is a full part. You are just actually staying there for a long time, for a short time, it's irrelevant. And therefore, this legislation, which definitely was for citizenship, and because the European citizenship, even though it doesn't exist, so I have to rephrase, citizenship in a EU country gives many, many rights to go to other countries, to live there, to start business, to buy properties, many, many aspects. The rights of residents are much smaller because if you have a residency permit in one of the European Union countries, it doesn't mean that you could go to work, for example. You have a residency permit in Malta. You go to Germany and you want to work there. You want to study there. You want to settle down there, then you have to apply for the local authorities, for the German authorities. So all in all, it has much less aspect of usage than the citizenship. It's quite different. And that's one of the most important reasons why I think that this court decision will not affect anything to do with residency, because that is a different topic, different rules, different regulations, nothing to do with citizenship.
Right. There's obviously different regulations. I just meant if this idea that you had touched on earlier was that sort of the haves and have nots, if this idea that European values are not for sale under citizenship, would the courts or possibly the EU Parliament, because the Parliament actually took a non binding vote about taking away visa free access for the Caribbean countries. And that was something that you and I talked about as well before recording. So I'm just wondering, not so much at a micro level, but on a macro EU level, if this idea of the people who have the financial ability to buy their way in, work towards citizenship, and obviously not being able to take one residence permit and just sort of port it to another country, but just this idea of being able to buy your way in, if you think that that will be under attack or perhaps maybe questioned on a higher level at all. That's really what I was getting at.
Nearly all, I would say all the European countries, or nearly all the countries all over the world, welcome people, as I mentioned before, who are bringing money into the economy. And therefore, the residency programs, the residency possibilities exist all over the world, because usually a country has like 10, 15 different ways how to grant residency for a person, whether it's a journalist, whether it's a scientist, whether it's a football player, whether it's a student, whether it's a short term temporary stuff, whether it's for a permanent residency, for long term. There are many variations. And you cannot, when you have a residency program, which means that all in all, the rules and regulations are very, very clearly defined. I think that is even better for a country, because then discretionary arrangements, under the table solutions, fortunately, are pushed away by having a completely clear, legal, 100% right, very, very public and transparent type of programs. But still, because this kind of stupid attitude, if I may say stupid, this kind of socialist mindset, therefore, unfortunately, then it is viewed in a partly same level as the citizenship. In 2021, if I remember correctly, the European Parliament made a decision so that all the countries offering residency by investment programs must roll up the programs till 2025. And they had that the number of applications must be decreased by 20% a year, blah, 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 blah. Nothing happened actually. And I think one of the other reasons, which is a kind of a security type of question and how should I say, financial type of a question, that yes, which one would a country be happy to do? Offering a guaranteed results residency program, clean, complete check of the persons who are applying, or under the table deals with well-connected lawyers and business people who are, I have good connection with this and I can arrange that. Because if they close the citizen residency by investment programs, this is what would happen, because the demand is there. So what would be the supply? Not the government supply, but it would be the private sector supply, which is then unfortunately would create much more corruption at the end. This is my professional opinion.
I was actually just thinking about what you said and sort of the parallel on the war on drugs. At least that's how the US has termed it. And I think that started back in the 80s under Ronald Reagan, where the US was launching this war on drugs to try to eradicate drug usage. And it's exactly what you said. It moved underground and it pushed it onto the black market. And when you look at countries, for example, now that have allowed marijuana usage or decriminalized it or fully legalized it, right? It's out in the open, they're taxing it, it's being used, but the usage really doesn't go up or down. It just becomes more apparent, or it goes on the black market and it turns into backroom deals, briefcase full of cash kind of exchanges, right? And I think it you hit you hit the nail on the head. It's going to turn into, hey, I know the senator or the minister of this department or whatever, and they can arrange for citizenship or residency for your family if you make a quote unquote donation to that person's foundation, charity, that kind of thing. Because this thing is like antiquity. It's as old as time. It's not anything new, right? So I definitely see sort of a parallel between like those things where the war on drugs essentially has sort of subsided a little bit and people have accepted, okay, like it's not going away. We might as well just legalize it, tax it, and try to get some revenue from that, right? Rather than to try to fight this inevitable demand that's there. Because whether or not it's legal, there will still always be rich individuals or people of high net worth wanting something and asking, hey, I've got enough cash. How much? Right? Because that's that for some people, that's the question. It's not can I or can I not afford it? It's how much money do you want so that you can facilitate what I want? That's sometimes the question.
Completely agree.
Yeah. Okay. We we can kind of turn away. I was curious your thoughts on this, and we'll move on later because on this podcast we talk about citizenship and residency by investment and Bitcoin. So we'll eventually get to Bitcoin, but I kind of want to just pivot from the European Union to the Caribbean. There was an article that came out on IMI earlier this week that was talking about St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and they took I believe, a poll of a certain amount of people. I think it was 1 or 2,000, and the percentage of what would you call people from St. Vincent and Vincentians? Yes, that's the term. I was like, well, they're not Grenadians, but okay, Vincentians. It was something like 60+% of people supported a citizenship by investment program. I'm wondering what you maybe think of the reality of something like that coming to fruition, or if there's any other areas, sort of hotspots, if you will, geographic locations that might be sort of emerging markets for citizenship by investment in this year or the near future.
Let's talk first about St. Vincent. And not every people maybe listening to this podcast know, but then they are quite near to each other. It's Antigua, Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Kitts. They are 5 countries. And there, the countries which are not, or the islands in that long row going south from Puerto Rico.
Yes. The chain of those islands, they're called the Eastern Antilles.
Yes, Leeward Islands and so on. So those islands, some of them are still owned or managed and controlled from abroad, whether it's the Netherlands, whether it's France, but from the remaining independent smaller countries, not Jamaica, because it's simply too big for this. Only St. Vincent and the Grenadines decided not to have a citizenship program with the political explanation that it ruins the society, blah, 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 whatever it is. And then to have a change and adding a supply to our business, then many people try to convince the prime minister or the political ruling party or whoever to have a citizenship program because financially it's so advantageous. The Prime Minister, Mr. Gonsalves, steadfastly this has the same opinion for the last 15 years or so. He says, no, we do not want this. We see a very bad example of certain things happening because then, okay, bad things are also happening, not just good things. We do not want it, period. And then if after a certain time your time is up as a politician, because nearly all the politicians or dictators or rulers or whatever, they have their time up, then political opposition comes into question. And it is, in a sense, logical that the companies, big companies, which want to have a new supply of citizenship programs, they approach the political opposition of that country. Well, think about it. It's logical. I think this is what I would do as a business person. I can't change the opinion of prime minister because then he said steadfast, so I have to turn to somebody else. Very cynical, but what can I do? This is how
Yep.
life is done.
Very
And
accurate.
and we also hear stories that how companies are helping governments to keep them in power because then they have license to operate, and then they have for lots of articles, Cambridge Analytica, and so on and so on. So all in all, it is valid that yes, there is a chance that there would be a new country which is offering citizenship in St. Vincent. But you see, I asked when we have an informal, closed channel between professionals. And then I just simply asked how much money was paid for this survey. Who knows whether the results are really there, whether they are true, and you could influence. So all in all, that's why I do not. I know that there are companies and countries who would like to change the current situation. But I'm not 100% sure that everything what is being published is true, and then there is no outside influence by just simply asking the questions in a certain way, which show that do you want it or you don't want it.
Well, that happens in any country, right?
Mhm.
Like you said, it depends on who is asking the question and how they're asking the question. It's very possible to frame a question to where you get the answer that you're looking to get. And then who are you asking, right? If you go to a certain area or a part of a country where maybe politically the answer that you're wanting to validate is more favorable, there's a myriad of different sort of outliers or possibilities um, that could have happened with this survey. And I completely agree with you. Who knows if it was funded, how it was asked, to whom it was asked? We don't know. But, it's out there. So I just thought I would ask. But you make a very valid point that there's always someone paying to either try to influence someone to come in or paying someone basically to stay in, right? It's sort of a push pull situation politically in a lot of these smaller countries. So, yeah, I don't necessarily know how that'll work out. But if I could maybe touch on that, what do you think if there's any geopolitical or security issues that some of these countries are facing, whether they're visa restrictions or trying to design new programs? I'm just curious, maybe your thoughts on how that might play out.
I think at the beginning of part of my beginning of my conversation included a parallel to the tax haven question. And what was very, very clear that the developed countries wanted to push the matters with the tax havens on the information exchange level and also the substance level. Now, just simply small companies registered in the Seychelles on the British Virgin Islands, if anybody wants to use them in a developed country, then that would raise flags, and then you have to show that there is substance behind it. Then you have a proper office, because otherwise they would just consider the transaction as non-existent if there is no substance behind these companies. Same way as information sharing that now with the United States and then the OECD information exchange. Now nearly all the countries are sharing the information about foreign citizens or foreign residents having money in their country and earning money out of it. I think that there is quite a lot of parallel with the residency and citizenship business. While, for example, if somebody is thinking about having a new citizenship program, definitely must have the approval of the big countries of United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, most probably. And I just let me reach a small aspect, but then you would understand and listeners would fully understand. Dominica, one of the 5 Caribbean countries, lost its visa free travel to the United Kingdom because then the United Kingdom said that we do not want people whom we refuse the visa application if they are coming from their original country, be it wherever in the world, just to play games with us, get citizenship in Dominica, and avoid the visa. And then they sent 3 or 4 notices to the Dominican government. That's in the public. That can be, you could read it. So all in all, it's nothing really, just a secret. And then because Dominica didn't care too much, they just asked the question: did you have any kind of visa refusal in the United Kingdom? And if somebody wanted to lie, they lied, because then the person just put a check. Unfortunately, the UK realized that too many people are using this and they canceled the visa-free travel possibility. So what should a new country do? Having an idea of starting a new program, having a cooperation with the UK. And how do you cooperate? You exchange information, because otherwise, how can you check that whether that person had refused applications in the UK if the UK doesn't tell you that that person had refused visa application? So then information exchange is going two ways, which I think is definitely how it would operate, which would be bad for the, how should I say, for the criminals or bad people, because then quite more things would be communicated the same way as I mentioned with tax havens and money in the bank accounts. But otherwise, for the suitability and the sustainability of the programs, maybe it's not a bad thing that the bad guys who are just simply lying in their applications cannot access these kind of possibilities. So this security aspect, I think, is one of the most important, if not the most important part, whenever somebody is operating or starting to operate a new program in citizenship. That, yes, understand the concern of big countries. And I think that is understandable also. I agree with it on my personal level. So, but you have to take it into consideration. Otherwise, we will take away your visa free travel possibility, and your citizenship program would be not worth really as much as you thought, maybe just nearly nothing.
Just to hit on something you said, I think one aspect that you're going to see start to evolve, and it's something that Malta has already done, is continuing due diligence. I know St. Kitts stood up their continuing due diligence on their citizens. They opened an office in Europe, I believe, to continue to monitor people for a period of years after receiving citizenship. So that might be something that other countries implement. And especially with the advancement with AI, it's not that difficult to just have constant monitoring of someone. Once you have their complete profile, you just click a box, and if their name pops up in any of the databases, something like that can easily be flagged and the issue can be addressed, right? Rather than having to manually go and check every year or every couple of years, or when someone wants to renew their passport, that sort of thing. So I think continuing due diligence might be something that we definitely see further in the future. That's just my take.
There is a little bit of danger in this approach, if I may say. Although I agree with you in one aspect, but then let's see the other side of it. Now we see that for many countries, if somebody gets on the sanctions list, could lose the citizenship. And I'm not so sure that whichever way I see it, let's say there would be a new war between whichever countries, big countries, and then person who got the citizenship with good intentions, nothing to hide. It was, everything was clear, everything was accepted, not a black mark, anything. Just because their own country started fights, obviously, and then the Russian-Ukrainian war is a good example. And then they are put amongst like 10,000 others, they are put on the blacklist. Is that a base for taking away the citizenship, while theoretically you must have the same rights as the locals? So if a local commits a crime, or the foreign who got the citizenship commits a crime, why should there be a different way of handling it? A local citizen, if I can call it as a local citizen, obviously that's not 100% correct, but then he goes to jail, so what? But then for the other, the citizenship revoked. So is it, I do not like the word fair, but is it really a fair idea of how the world should work? Not really. Because who knows what would happen in the next 5 years? Even if I was completely clean at the time of getting the citizenship at that time, then why and on what base can it be taken away if I do not do anything else at the end? Even if I do, then the same rules should apply. Let them put me into jail, or if my other country doesn't put me in jail, then they issue an arrest warrant and so on. There are so many ways to handle it. So that is why keeping track of the applicants for a considerable time, let's say for 5 years or 10 years, whether they do something right or wrong, could have this kind of result, which I think will not be really acceptable for my way of thinking. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, there's a few ways of approaching that. We agreed that we weren't going to get into politics on this episode, but unfortunately, I think it's inevitable in this line of work just because the laws that govern everything that we do are political in nature. My thought, just being a libertarian minded individual, is that I don't like the idea of a big state creating a nanny state and having constant surveillance on someone. It's just unnecessary unless there's a reason. But I can understand that to maintain the integrity of a program and to try to be above reproach is a constant battle when you're having large countries like you mentioned, the US, Canada, Australia, UK, sort of breathing down your neck and asking, "Hey, did did you vet this person? Did you vet that person?" Or when one question comes up about an applicant, all of a sudden the entire validity of the program comes into question, which is ridiculous. You're going to have some bad apples in any group. I don't care how big or small they are, it's inevitable. So I do agree with you in that sense, but it's a balancing act. It's really difficult, especially like for these small countries, to try to maintain their autonomy and their visa free status, which is a selling point of the program. So I think it's a very delicate situation how to balance this idea of, autonomy, sovereignty, and sort of being beholden to larger countries or these other political entities that control them or that actually, sort of not even control them, but just sort of bless the program and promise that they won't give them any hassle in the future. I don't know. That's just my take on it.
It's a kind of a minefield, I would say. It's not so easy to give a yes or no to the idea whether it's good idea to follow the activities, because maybe they found out that that the investigation is started against that person who committed something before getting the citizenship. And what should be the so yeah, there are, I think, reasons for doing it and not doing it for both sides, and it needs really careful deliberation about the consequences, or what to do, especially if that and those matters are politically influenced and not just pure crime we are talking about.
Correct. I wanted to jump and change topics if we can. Let's talk about taxes, right? So we've been talking about citizenship, residency, visa free travel, but a lot of individuals are concerned about taxes. This idea of moving to a tropical paradise, tax free, being able to keep all your money sounds so enticing to someone who might be living in a high tax jurisdiction, maybe someplace like Norway or Sweden, Iceland, where they're just paying, God knows 50% plus in tax and just feeling that, like, what are they working for, right? Yeah, there are social services, but when more than half of your money goes directly to the government, it does disincentivize productivity and ingenuity. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about people who move specifically for tax reasons, either for tax optimization, or what has been your experience when a client comes to you and says, Laszlo, I want to move out of this high tax jurisdiction. Where can you put me that, has good weather and lower taxes? How do you approach that? Or what's your approach to the tax aspect of our business?
I think it's not that complicated. If the person has the intention to move out of the country physically, then the choice is, and yeah, there are two answers, and depending on the actual movement or non-movement of the client, I think there's a deciding factor. If he wants to move out, then yes, it's the quality of life, health services, educational possibilities, which would be important at the end, because then if you want to enjoy the life, if you move there, by far the majority of the people having second residency or citizenship are using it as a plan B, and not they are not moving actually into that country where they get residency or citizenship. For them, then if they remain in their home country, then the legal tax possibilities are not wide at all. When I'm emphasizing legal, obviously, I do not want to get in a situation that I'm advising anything illegal. This is just for informational purposes, blah, 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 blah.
We always do have to say that disclaimer. None of this is tax or legal advice. We are simply just talking about and expressing our personal opinions.
That is just for information purpose, and so on and so on and so on. Yeah, true. So if there is just one big country, the United States, which is taxing its citizens based on citizenship and not where actually they live. For US clients, unfortunately, this is not really a choice. Yes, you could see possibilities in double tax treaties, different deductions, foreign earned income deductions, and so on and so on. It is, I'm not a US tax lawyer, obviously, and that's why I rather not comment on many things in this respect. But yes, for US citizens, unfortunately, this is not really solving anything, only if they renounce their US citizenship, which is again something which takes a serious decision to do. But anyway, that's for the US. For the non-US countries, again, I'm returning back this constant sinus wave of relationship between the citizens, their own government or their own country. Give you an example that Portugal had a very, very successful tax system for people who just moved there with proper residency, live there or just partly live there. And for example, hundreds of thousands of pensioners went to Portugal from Germany and from Scandinavia, or in fact, more than 100,000. So more than thousands, it is rather more than a million. And because in those countries where they came from, pensions were taxed. And because this Portuguese system didn't tax their pensions, then obviously it was an additional advantage of saving 25 or 30% on their taxes and moving into a sunny country with a good European life and so on. And unfortunately, it reached a point where the German and the Scandinavian countries' governments squeezed Portugal to abolish this kind of favorable treatment of pensions. And now they cannot use it tax free and they have to pay the tax on their pensions, because then the big countries woke up and said, oh, no, no, this can't continue anymore because that you are ruining our recap. Even though you have worked for that pension, you worked like 40 years for that to earn that pension, and otherwise you are not really using social services. So why should you pay tax, by the way? The second thing which is just coming up, and I have to urge a little bit of speeding up the idea when somebody wants to think about this, that more and more countries are now thinking either to change their tax system to a citizenship based tax system, but if they move and they get another citizenship or they move to another country, will not really solve all this question at all, like for the Americans. And then in Germany and France, that is a valid now, okay, and already existing proposal, although when it would materialize, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, we do not know, and maybe not at all. But the second thing which is frightening frightening in a normal way to say that, is that more and more rich countries are enacting exit tax requirements. If you move to a better place, which has in fact, if you go to nearly any other place, it depends on the local legislation. Then, unfortunately, you have to pay a high tax on your unearned income back at home. You have to liquidate your investments and so on and so on and so on with all the tax obligations. And therefore, this is the weapon, the exit tax, which I would say in 5 or 10 years' time, nearly all the countries would enact. And then it would be more expensive for people to move out physically from their home countries. And that is why it's not because I want to earn more sales. No, 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 I'm not operating on this level. But that now, I would say in 5 years' time, situation would be much worse, or 10 years' time. So when should anybody move? As soon as possible, because the exit tax is coming in many, many countries. Even it is now working in Germany, in Denmark, and so on, in the United States, when you renounce your citizenship. Exit taxes now would be widespread, and that would take a big bite of your wealth if you are not planning carefully or you are not moving on time, but later on.
One of the stories that I love to always tell people, I watched a documentary on Sir Richard Branson, the founder of the Virgin Group, and when he was 27 or 28, he actually purchased Necker Island, which is an island that he owns in BVI from an MP, and he purchased it for, I think it was back 74 or 75, something like that. And he purchased it, I believe, around 250,000 pounds at that time. Well, since then, he has been a resident of BVI, right? So he has never had to renounce his British citizenship, has enjoyed all the rights of living in the UK, but he is a resident on paper of BVI with, no personal income tax and became a billionaire as a result of that. So, and, we could look at the closure of the UK's non-dom program earlier this year, but you really hit on a good point that a lot of these programs they close eventually, right? Sometimes new programs come about, but when a program looks like it's too good, it doesn't last. I can personally tell you about 2 years ago, I was in the process of trying to get permanent residency in Panama under the Friendly Nations visa. And at that time, you only needed to invest $5,000 and create an economic tie to the country. The economic tie could be you simply just bought an off the shelf corporation, put the $5,000 in a business bank account, and there you go. You have PR for life for probably less than, you factor in legal fees and some government fees, less than $10,000 cost. You have PR for life. But before I could get everything together, the program closed. Or, sorry, I should say the program didn't close. They actually changed that requirement and upped it to $250,000, which is
Exactly. Yes.
considerably much more than just a $5,000 economic investment. Like, you didn't even have to donate any money. You just had to put the 5 grand into the economic tie to the country, and you could take it out after a certain amount of time. So, these programs, we could go down the list. They only last for a certain time. So, when should you move? Probably yesterday. But if you weren't able to do that, then take advantage of the programs that do exist today and hope that, at least you can get grandfathered in under those conditions.
Grab it as you as soon as you can. This is what I'm usually saying. These are programs are changing all the time. Yes, and usually they are either closed, they are getting more expensive. Completely.
Yeah. I'm curious. Let's say a person walks in, let's say a client walks in, is worth between 3 to 5 million, and it's almost exclusively in crypto. They want to move to a crypto friendly jurisdiction. They're not opposed to leaving their high tax home country. Give me a scenario of what are some things you could advise a client to do, and possibly name maybe one or two jurisdictions that might try to help facilitate what that person is trying to do, and obviously improve their tax situation to maybe avoid capital gains taxes.
I have to admit that this kind of question with the crypto wealth generated in mainly in the last 5 years is a question which I face quite often. Again, I'm not a US tax lawyer and so on and so on. So just for informational purposes, we are talking about not specific cases and not specific, especially not specific solutions. For
Understood.
US citizens to move out and to leave the US, renunciation of the US citizenship is needed to avoid any kind of taxation rules with
Mhm.
crypto, as far as I know. So
Right.
for them to move into another country simply doesn't solve any kind of such a problem, or doesn't help them at all. Now, for the clients who are coming from countries which do not have the citizenship-based taxation, they have several places where they can set up their shop. There are two different tax possibilities which can be utilized in this respect. That is not just for crypto related income, where
Mhm.
it is indicated, especially that crypto is not taxed at all. But I'm talking now about other income also, not just the crypto related trading or selling or whatever type of income, where you either have a system where you do not have to pay any personal income tax, period. For example, United Arab Emirates, where
Correct.
it is impossible to get citizenship, but you could get residency, has zero personal income tax. And if you are managing your investments only for yourself, that is not considered as a trading activity, because it's like converting from one currency to the other, because you think that that would be really more profitable. So
Mhm.
all in all, you would get a zero personal income tax rate if you move there.
Sure.
Vanuatu, for example, has no income tax at all,
Mhm.
meaning that, for example, while for international transactions, somebody is asking a Vanuatu citizen to provide the tax residency certificate. The tax residency certificate doesn't exist because there is no personal income tax. So you cannot be tax resident. The whole idea of a concept is not valid at all because there is no personal income tax.
Sure.
Sounds a little bit funny, but still, that is the legal case.
Understood.
Then kits and EVs also is quite favorable when we are talking about personal income tax because then it's zero. In Grenada, talking about some of the countries which might help the applicants. Then Grenada also has a territorial type of a system where only the money which is earned in Grenada would be taxed. So yes, there are 5, 6, 8 such countries which still has this easy system, and some of them have citizenship programs. So yes, for certain people, that would be a good way how to solve this crypto question for the near or the medium term future. There is also another possibility, which I mentioned, and I think you mentioned also in your question, to move into a country which has a favorable specific taxation of crypto.
Right.
My problem is that I simply do not trust those possibilities for a medium term. They are good for short term, but as soon as locals, where there is a normal tax system, Portugal had this system, by the way, that crypto income was not considered as taxable if it was kept for 1 year, and all in all, if you were trading, unfortunately, you generated personal income tax. But then all these bigger countries where they feel that the foreign residents can use tax-free systems
Right.
for themselves, why the locals have to pay. They do not want to abolish the local people's tax obligations, but they want to have tax obligations for the foreigners living in that country also. And that is why I cannot, this is changing constantly. Germany was also considered a good one, but the same principle to change any kind of legislation is so easy when taxation is involved, and to say, no, it's not zero anymore. It's general tax, taxed in the same way as other source of income. And then the whole solution is gone. While if you move to a country which has a completely tax-free system, then yes, it is possible that that would change in 5 or 10 years' time. But at the end, for the foreseeable future, you do not have a political risk or taxational risk that the government would say, aha, the locals must pay, so you have to pay also. That would be my answer to your question.
Okay. What do you think possibly about a European take on that question? And I'm just gonna bring it back to Malta as I know you're based there. You know, that's perhaps the European country that I know the best in terms of just the legality of things. What about someone who has the majority of their wealth in crypto getting residency in Malta, as Malta doesn't have tax on foreign capital gains? So even if the money is remitted to the country, they're still not paying tax on that. And if someone wants like a European residency, would Malta serve as a possible option for them in that scenario?
Yes and no, which is a strange answer, I know, but I explain. When you talk about capital gains, yes, it's true. But then if you are trading, it's not true because then they are not investments because they are trading activities. Capital gains in respect then would be most probably considered taxable. And also that is just a gray area, not gray because it's legal or not legal, but because the rules are not very, very clearly defined whether trading in crypto and investing in crypto and selling it later is a capital or a trading income. If you have a trading income, that might be taxable. The Malta has another advantage, not this one, which I do not feel as safe at the end, because again, just an interpretation from the tax authorities could change the whole situation of taxable or non-taxable type of treatment. But Malta has a very interesting system, and I think taxation system, and I have to explain it. It should take like 2 or 3 minutes of how it operates, and at the end you would understand why I would say that Malta is a good place. I hope listeners would be also not really bored with the topic because I think it's fascinating, and it also opens lots of possibilities, by the way, not just for crypto related income, but also for other types of income.
Absolutely. Please explain away.
In the United Kingdom, which was the originator of this concept, which is called as non-domiciled person, and unfortunately, the UK abolished it, by the way, last year. And now they are trying to enact something similar because so much wealth was leaving the country. But anyway, that's again a long topic of how countries and governments could make mistakes. So it is operating on a principle that you are going to the UK. And I think that it started at the end of the Second World War, where big Greek shipping magnates tried to buy up the huge fleet of commercial vessels which catered for the war, so to supply the soldiers. But at the end of the war, obviously, they were just not worth anything at all. And that was a huge fleet the US had. And they bought them up and they started to investigate because at that time, Greece had a very, very tricky political situation. Well, I'm talking about 46, 47, 48, even in the 50s. And then they started to investigate which country could be good for their business activities, not just for the shipping, but for other activities also. And they have found out that the UK had a regulation which said that if you can prove that you do not want to stay in the UK till the end of your life, and you do not send the money and you do not spend the money in the UK and you keep it abroad, then your income, that income which you keep outside, will be completely tax free. So the Greek shipping magnates did their companies not just in the UK but abroad, and they operated, and by far majority of its wealth, of the wealth which they generated, became tax free in the United Kingdom completely legally. There are some parallels, obviously, with crypto, which could operate in the same way, which it doesn't, but because the UK abolished it. Now, really, I have to emphasize you do not, to have the zero tax, you have to not spend it, you cannot spend it, and you do not transfer it, you do not remit it into the UK. Now, Malta and Ireland uses the same system, even though the UK abolished it, but Malta very successfully offers it as a solution, which actually means that if you have a crypto account outside and a financial account when you change it to fiat or change it back is outside of Malta, and the wealth you do not bring back to Malta or you do not bring to Malta, and let's say you buy, you remember what I said about your intention to return to another country to die, you do not want to spend all your life in that country, you buy a burial plot in your original country or wherever in the world, and you keep the documentation, then the Maltese tax system will tax you as a non-domiciled person, meaning again, only the money which you remit to Malta to a Maltese bank account or you spend in Malta will be taxable, and also non-Maltese income would be taxed at 5,000 euros only. But then if you are talking about serious money, then 5,000 euros tax obligation will not be really interesting at the end, because of that is not really a big amount of money. And everything else outside of Malta would remain under your control, but will not be taxable in Malta. And if you left your home country, Germany, France, whichever it is, then all in all, German tax obligations or French tax obligations will not apply to you. If you live in Malta, you could travel a lot all over the world. That's not a problem. Do not stay more than 90 days or 186 days. And this kind of solution in Malta would be most probably good for many, many of the listeners. I hope that I even though it was long, but I tried to give a full picture of how it works.
No, I definitely think you did. What I always say to clients is that, it it's not so much where can you go, but what are your intentions? What are you trying to achieve? Like whether it's for lifestyle, tax optimization, you want to just move somewhere where it's not snowing 5 6 months out of the year. Like what is your end goal? Like what's your end game? What are you trying to achieve? So with someone in crypto, it really depends, and there's so many different variables. Some people are just looking for a home base where they can set up a low tax or no tax jurisdiction, and they're sort of slow matting. They're spending 2 3 months in a country, so they're still technically a tourist in each country they travel to. So they might, spend 3 months in 4 different countries throughout the year, never trigger a tax obligation in any of them, and just sort of move around, that sort of thing. But a lot of countries are clamping down on people that are doing that, and not having a tax residency is an issue for some people, specifically in crypto, and especially if you come from any of the Anglophile countries, the US probably being the biggest perpetrator of that. Well, actually, let me take that back. The US is different in the sense that you will always have a tax obligation to the United States, but countries like the UK and Canada are probably the most egregious about asking, where's your center of life? Where are you actually a tax resident? So if you're not paying tax to them, you pay tax to us, right?
Or you have to cut all your ties to that country. Germany is very, very bad in this respect.
Mhm.
You cannot even keep one property under your own name. And it's
Wow.
better not to generate any income in Germany. Close your bank accounts. Do not keep a property for rental purposes. Don't do it when you leave the country, because then they could say, yes, your center of economic interest is in Germany. We do not care about where else you are, but still you have to pay tax there. It's getting worse and worse and worse. With Spain and Germany are the two worst countries in Europe, I would say.
I know that Spain uh, came after Shakira, and that was a big tax case where she said she was actually living in the Bahamas, which is obviously a zero tax jurisdiction. But when they actually went through the flight manifests, they're like, you're actually spending more than 200 days a year here. And, eventually she ended up settling, but that was probably the most recent high profile tax case out of Spain that I can think of. And Spain really went after her. I mean, for years. It wasn't just a sort of behind closed doors negotiation. It was something that dragged on for quite a few years, even after she had left Spain and was no longer living there. So, yeah, Spain, I do know, is quite egregious about that. Germany, I'm not too knowledgeable about, but yeah, I've heard some stories just anecdotally about Germany being, don't even keep a car if you have that, like sell everything, don't even have like a storage unit in Germany is that's really interesting about those different things pertaining to crypto law, tax law, that sort of thing. I wanted to know if we could maybe get into more of the Bitcoin aspect of the show. We just briefly touched on some aspects. So I'm curious to hear, what are your thoughts about how does Bitcoin or crypto fit in to the citizenship and residency by investment industry? And we can get into more detail a little later, but just from a high altitude overview, what are your general thoughts on the role of Bitcoin and crypto in this industry?
There are two or three possible connections to a citizenship or a citizenship program with crypto. One is your source of wealth, which
Right.
they investigate. So if your source of wealth is crypto, then you have to produce a kind of a documentation which shows, I mean, the whole role of having this due diligence is to avoid bad guys. People having business in crypto or having their funds in crypto itself is not a problem at all, but then the whole system is built up try to screen out the bad people.
Mhm.
So one thing is the source of wealth, that is why in the 5 Caribbean countries or all the others which are providing citizenship, then the source of wealth is one of the most important, if not the most important question. And therefore, question is, if your source of wealth is from crypto, how can you prove it?
Right.
There are countries which are doing, and Malta was not a good example in this respect because they wanted to have the whole crypto ledgers, all what you had in the past,
Mhm.
in an understandable format, which was not easy at all. So not many crypto wealth generators got their multi-citizenship because of that way, in a sense, but that's breach under the water. So
Mhm.
the source of wealth in the Caribbean now is more considered and more acceptable if it's in cryptos than, let's say, 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they said, no, no, we do not accept, we do not. Basically, is that their knowledge was not really up to date so that they could make an educated and very good guess whether that person is good or not, and whether it was strictly money laundering or whatever they do not want.
Mhm.
So funds is one aspect of this. The second is whether you can pay the government fees, the government duties, and other fees, including the donation of the country, in crypto. And I have to say that currently no country offering citizenship accepts as a government authority crypto as a way of payment. There are two basic solutions in this business. One is that I can take delivery of your money or crypto, I exchange it into fiat, and then I transfer it to the authorities. But there are some countries where you have to pay the necessary donation and the government related costs from your personal bank account, which is not crypto related. And then you have to send the money from there to the authorities in that specific country, which is the least convenient solution for obviously if somebody has a big wealth in crypto. But otherwise, the source of funds, payment for the services and additional fees, and payment for the donation from your own bank accounts, those are the three different solutions which are used in these countries. Vanuatu, for example, is a good example where the market professionals can take the crypto, they can exchange it into fiat, and then they can send the full amount of money to Vanuatu, and then that would be accepted as a solution. While, for example, in Grenada, the money has to come from your own personal bank account. So I, as a professional advisor to you, a professional consultant to you, cannot take delivery of the money, exchange it into fiat, and pay the necessary fees and money. I hope that this was understandable in a sense to the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, different jurisdictions are going to have different levels of due diligence and protocols put into place about what they will accept, what they won't. Vanuatu, as you mentioned, is much more flexible, probably more so than any other jurisdiction about what they will accept, what they won't. So, but they're not necessarily so much beholden as the Caribbean countries because they lost their Schengen visa free access, and so they're not really fighting to hold on to that so much. So I think in a sense, I actually had a conversation with someone the other day about this, that and I think in a way it might actually liberate Vanuatu moving forward. I won't name names, but there are rumblings that they might get UK visa free access back. And if that happens, supposedly Ireland might be next. So we'll see. I don't necessarily know if that officially going to happen, but I will tell you that there are currently talks at the government level for that to happen for Vanuatu to get those two countries back for visa free access. So we'll wait and see how that happens. But yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Grenada as well. They have much more due diligence. They're beholden to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and then correspondent banks through the US about how they can or can't accept donations. So it becomes political at that point. And this was kind of something that I had on our conversation that we had last week, where is there the political will to sort of who is going to take the first step and start accepting crypto? And I think basically in the Caribbean countries, at least, if one country does, I think slowly the other dominoes will fall. And as a group, they will all kind of eventually come to accept crypto. But someone has to make that first move. We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah,
Obvi-
exactly.
I mean, like everything in this industry, and especially with crypto, it's a watch, wait, and see kind of game because, it bothers me if I can kind of just go off on a mini tangent. It bothers me so much when people start speculating about the price increase of Bitcoin and sort of mid year 2 weeks ago. Bitcoin was at around 93,000 US, I think was like the low point. And then recently it hit on 105,000 US. So, within the span of 7 to 10 days, we had an increase of 12,000 US. And it was something like a 30% increase from what it was in March to now. And so some people are speculating that we're in a new bull run, that it's 200,000 by the end of the year. It's really crypto specifically, but also this industry. Everything is a moving target. Like there's nothing static in this industry, and policies change, for example, overnight, like what St. Kitts did a few years ago. They had their discounted program at 125,000. Next day, did to 250,000 without any notice, no grandfathering in of applications. It was either, are you in on this day? It's 125. If not, it's 250 the next day. So I mean, these these programs kind of to hit on what you said before. These programs change, they close, they open, they are modified sometimes without any notice. Especially with crypto, it's always difficult to tell kind of where things are going to move. But I think we are slowly moving in the right direction. um, I'm curious if you think what someone should do as a plan B, or as David Lesperance puts it, a fire escape plan. I really like that terminology that he coined for people. But if someone were to become recently wealthy, right, have a rapid appreciation of personal wealth, where do you think citizenship or residency by investment fits into that picture of a balanced portfolio?
I think that I'm not so sure that the two things are related,
Okay.
if I
Please
may say
explain.
so.
Yeah, sure.
Let's say that a French citizen moves to Malta and cut the ties with France as on a general level with taxes required, so that they won't bother him. Then
Mhm.
he is basically free to do sell, because then selling is important, because this is where you realize your gains. If you do not sell, you could go and you could get citizenship for many countries, and then after you get that country citizenship, or you get the residency, let's say Malta or wherever it is, then the local rules would really legislate of what can you do with your crypto. And therefore, if let's say there is a German citizen, let it be a French, okay, French citizen moves to Malta, has no liability in France at the exit, and brings the wealth and changes the if he is using an exchange, changes the place of doing business and the residency to Malta. Then, all in all, then for the future, if he stays in Malta and if it doesn't go back to France to live, obviously, because that's an obvious requirement, then I would say that would give very good possibilities to have tax free income for the time being. That's about residency. If you go to citizenship in the Caribbean, that I mentioned, or Vanuatu,
Right.
Vanuatu is completely tax free, but then you have to move there, or you have to move to a place like the United Arab Emirates where you have a zero income tax, meaning that all in all, a residency permit with a citizenship might be the best combination, although obviously it would cost you more. And then you could accuse me of overselling something, which is not the case, because professionally, I would say a Caribbean citizenship with a European residency, especially with tax aspects and crypto aspects taken into consideration, might be a very, very good medium term solution.
I definitely think that those things are not mutually exclusive, but I was just curious on your thoughts about someone who might have this appreciation of wealth and looking to mitigate their tax obligation or their tax situation, because obviously that's how you stay wealthy, right? By not giving away your money to the government, who's probably going to spend it on some ridiculous climate change program about how pigeons fly in the opposite direction when when who knows when the certain time of the year pigeon flies in the opposite direction, but climate change, right? I mean, these ridiculous ideologies. Yeah, I can definitely see the point you're making there. I do want to just be respectful of time, so maybe we could just wrap up with one or two last questions, if that's all right.
Okay, no problem.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the direction you think that citizenship by investment, residency by investment is going. We've kind of alluded to this industry moves fast and you never know what sort of random event might pop up. But are there any trends that you're noticing, or any practices that you're seeing that maybe might become more prominent in the next year or two?
I think that the security aspect, be it as the screen out the bad guys or source of wealth and so on and so on, or visa free travel refusers, I think that the security aspect is now the cornerstone of any new country to get into this business, which means that it has to be the same cornerstone for the already existing solutions, countries which are offering these solutions, that yes, they have to take it more and more and more seriously about these security aspects of working with big countries which could provide them with the visa-free travel, which is one of the most important selling point of these citizenships. So I think that the security aspect is the most important now at this point in our business, to grow the business and to be accepted the same way as they are accepted as now.
Okay, so security. Okay. I hadn't really thought about that aspect because you don't really hear security spoken about much. I mean, yeah, okay, due diligence, yes, but the aspect of someone actually being a, I guess, bona fide security threat or a potential security threat to any of these countries is never really something that you hear.
Maybe I made a mistake by using this word, if I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, sure.
When I'm saying security aspects to a country, or which part of that person's past or current activities could be a problem, not tax wise,
Right, right,
reputational
right.
wise, and
Mhm.
all these aspects. When I'm just simplify it as by calling as security aspects of our country, about exchange of information, about the refused visa, as I mentioned before, there are many aspects. But compared to how much is the money to, or whether they decrease it or increase it, I think that this is the one requirement which would be demanded by big countries constantly, and it would be worse and worse, or they would need higher compliance with these wishes. Otherwise, they can close their programs and they will not earn any money out of it. In this respect, yes, I have to rephrase it a little bit, but because security could mean different things.
I understand what you're saying. You're just talking about the profile of an applicant, whether they're potentially politically exposed, whether they might be high profile, a public figure, a celebrity, or perhaps a ultra high net worth individual, something like that. And am I understanding that in the correct context?
Yes, yes, yes. Money laundering type of a possibility, security risk for the country. I call it as a security risk because it hurts the reputation of the country, and that is in my mind belongs to that place.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I appreciate you clarifying that. Thank you very much. So, I guess the last thing that I would really ask is what are your final thoughts? I know, off air we had a long conversation about many different topics related to this industry and sort of the history of some things. Some specific jurisdictions are more problematic than others, if you will. I think that's been nice to those jurisdictions. There are reputational nuances, if you will, to each program, and I think honestly, based upon how the programs operate, they earn those reputations accordingly. So I just wanted to know any final thoughts. Let's do this. How about any predictions that you'd like to make? I know you mentioned security, but do you see any changes in how programs are structured at all? I definitely have some thoughts, but I'm just curious about maybe any thoughts you might have about the structure of programs moving forward.
I would say that it is my understanding, and that's why I emphasize maybe too many times of the attacks against the OECD by the OECD about the tax havens, that this same thing happens. More substance must be put behind any plans which somebody wants to execute, whether it's partly financial, whether it's partly citizenship or residency based. If you want to really use the system, you have to put substance behind it. Where you get your citizenship, do you want to live there? You have to visit that country, you have to go there sometimes. If you get a residency in the European Union, in one of the countries, show that yes, you are really tied, because then if anything changes, that would help your situation if you prepare for the future. And this is more substance is what I feel, and what I think would be an important consideration, one of the most important consideration if somebody is thinking it. All times of here is the money, give me your passport, I think they would be over, or they are already over, because of this security, due diligence checks, and so on and so on. The same way as bank account opening for Americans abroad, it is getting very hard since that legislation came into force, the FATCA legislation. So for the
Mhm.
citizenship and residency programs, really you have to get much better knowledge than, let's say, 2, 3, or 5 years ago, because then these countries, although they look the same and they provide the same product, if I can call it as a product, there are nuances in every other aspect of their programs, and therefore you have to be careful of which one you choose. perception of what would happen in 5 or 10 years time, I have to say I cannot calculate with anything. Think
Yeah,
about it. If you would go back to 2019, would you have thought that we would leave it in the following 5 or 6 years time? It's not easy to plan ahead
of
with more
course.
than 3 years. Let's put it this way.
Hmm.
That's the problem. But that's I think generally affects everybody's life, that business life. That how can we plan like 3 years ahead of what
Yeah.
would happen between China, the United States, and all over the world? This kind of problem. You have to be careful. You have to be up on the top, and maybe you have to talk to good advisors who have this specific knowledge of the specific field, like citizenship and residency, or what are the current trends and what is expected for next year when I want to start something, for example. Was that an understandable reply, if I
Oh,
may ask?
absolutely. No, I was actually going to say, I think that's a really good place to close out. I think those are definitely some words of wisdom. Things are only going to continue to get a little harder and a little more difficult. I don't really see any type of regulation becoming suddenly easy or less strict. I think it's slowly the noose is going to get a little tighter around the neck. And, I don't really know where that breaking point is, but I definitely think that you make a very good point that you never know if a certain program is going to lose visa free access. I mean, a lot of times the Caribbean jurisdictions are spoken about as a collective, but they do have different visa free travel agreements with other countries, right? Like some countries might, for example, Antigua and Barbuda, I believe, is the only CBI that has South Africa visa free access, right? So, like, if you're South African and you're looking to go back to your home country, then that presents a good option. So, there are these nuances, even though they are all relatively priced at around the same level. There are nuances between the five programs. So I think that's a good place to end it. I really, really appreciate your time, Laszlo. Thank you so much for your insights and your takes on the industry. Any last words, or where can people find you, and if you want to plug anything specifically?
They can find me through you. I think that's not a problem at all. Only thing which I would like to add, that most probably people who are listening to this podcast are also in the same situation like I am. I'm happy to do what I'm doing. And that is like when a business and the pleasure is just get mixed. That's why I have to spend so much time on this. But I enjoy, and I enjoyed also this possibility to participate at this podcast. And I have to thank you for the listeners and to you expressly that I was able to say something and try to help people to get more detailed information about how these residencies and citizenships are working.
Well, again, I thank you so much for your time. This has been very educational, and hopefully the listeners will get something out of this as well. So, with that, I will just say thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for listening to the Bitcoin Lawyer Podcast. For more information, please visit our website at www.bitcoinlawyer.com. And remember, Bitcoin Lawyer is your legal bridge between Bitcoin and freedom.